Red Dawn. Well, actually, Bob, do you want to talk about the case that Avis quoted, cited?
I'm unfamiliar with the case that she cited, but every government, of course, has the police power and literally has a Latin phrase that's called parens patriae. Governments have the obligation to take care of their citizens. And so what the tribal nations are doing here is trying to protect their populations from the pandemic of 100 years. So they are exercising a power and can use police power to control the movement of certain peoples, as every government is doing, as Navajo Nation is doing, as many of the states have done, which South Dakota, I guess, has not issued any kind of stay-at-home orders. The vast majority of states have. So that's an exercise of the police power and what Avis was literally discussing in that case.
Red Dawn, so the governor, as Bob just noted, the governor has not done any sort of stay-at-home orders. She's been just sort of letting the disease run rampant. I think I saw that the state of South Dakota has like the second highest number of new cases per day. How is the state legislature dealing with that and trying to get the governor to move on that? And also maybe maybe you are an Oglala Sioux Tribal member. I saw a lot of call outs for veterans to go and man the checkpoints there. Do you see a conflict with arising out of that?
So as far as the shelter in place, the governor has not restricted our movement and has put out advisement on quote unquote common sense. And you see that it disproportionately hit certain areas. And that's what we don't want to happen on the reservation. So in Sioux Falls, where the numbers are the highest, it's the immigrant population working at Smithfield factory, the processing plant. Part of that was just the design and the location, very close quarters. And they went in and they tried to mitigate that, but it was already pretty much too late. It had already kind of gone through that community, which the immigrant community, I would say, with the economic and health, as well as the overcrowding or multiple generations living in one very close quarters, is very similar to the reservations. And you see that has run rapid across South Dakota in a whole, because we had provisions. I mean, we had the luxury of seeing what happened on the coast and had put in effect you cannot congregate in more than 10 people. The schools were let out in the March 15th. So because of our location, it hadn't spread, except mainly in Sioux Falls was a hot spot. And so we were, because of the rural location, it hadn't spread to the rest of South Dakota, specifically West River. But we know that if it gets on the reservations, we'll have a similar situation as Sioux Falls and the Navajo Nation. So that's what we're trying to prevent. And we have different communities. And because of our sovereignty, because of our leadership, because of looking at the health and wellness of our community, that's why we have to put different provisions up, such as the checkpoints and the shelter in place and the lockdowns in certain circumstances on the OST, the Oglala Sioux Tribe area. As far as what was the second part of the?
I actually just see a comment here about one of our listeners are saying, I heard that pure rumor the National Guard was sent to Pine Ridge first to dismantle the checkpoints, and then they will be dealing with Cheyenne River.
Yeah, so I actually, as part of our committee meeting that we just concluded, that was dispelled. There was no, the governor did not send out the National Guard, and at this time does not plan on that. The letter clearly stated legal action, not anything about the National Guard coming out. The National Guard was involved in North Dakota, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribes testing process. So that was a collaboration between the tribe and the state. And they went and they did mass testing to get a baseline of kind of what they're looking at. I believe it was 400 tests that they had deployed. In the state of South Dakota, the National Guard has not, nor does it plan on coming to dismantle the checkpoints. I think any action taken by the governor will be legal action, not through the National Guard. So I would definitely like to make that clear. They were not there, and they do not plan on coming out.
Good to know that.
Oh, so then the other safety measure is once we heard that there was a call out and the checkpoints were, they had a lot of people out there. So I wanted to thank the veterans and everybody that showed up to protect our, our sovereignty and our people and make sure that our health and wellness is paramount. But at the same time, please, please, please use masks, continue to use hand sanitizers, social distance, because what we don't want is to create a health risk while we're protecting our people. So.
Thank you so much. I'd like to also bring into the conversation, Natalie Stites means she's a law graduate, and she is also a run for mayor of the city of Rapid City.
It was good to hear from my chairman, Harold Frazier. I'm enrolled with the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. It really strikes me with this discussion, I think, between how the tribal governments are responding and how the state government is responding. And then you look at the county and city responses, there's a really diverse set of approaches. And I think that it seems like, if South Dakota isn't taking any stringent measures around social distancing or state shelter in place or stay at home type orders, and there's 27,000 people who are unemployed now in South Dakota, I understand, or at least that's how many claims have been made to the Reemployment Assistance Agency under the Department of Labor. And we have $1.6 billion coming in from the feds under the CARES Act. I just have, I have a question on whether or not, is this really a conflict between the tribal governments and the state government's approach in terms of the pandemic, or rather is this like some competition for resources that are coming, both at the tribal level from the federal level as well as, to the state? So I don't know. I just sort of felt like there was a lot of spectacle involved in this. And you mentioned how surprising it was and what an aggressive move it was. I want to, what do you think? You mentioned the difference between the tribe and the state, but also like, what are South Dakota's costs? And if they're saying everything's okay and let's reopen the economy, then what are they going to be using that, $1.5 billion in coronavirus relief funds for? So those are some of my questions and what I'm thinking sitting here and, the Black Hills here in Rapid City and seeing the quick turnaround that Mayor Allender and the Rapid City Council did in regards to the closure of businesses. So I see Red Dawn trying to talk. So I want to.
I'm just listening. I'm following along.
Okay, cool. So I mean, I'm framing it in this context and just trying to get at a little bit more about the difference in response and what are the actual costs that are going on to the tribal government and to the state in regards to the pandemic.
So I don't know of the actual number costs from the tribe, and we are waiting for, and they may be released, kind of what our revenues look like for the state. But the costs, both the economic costs and community costs of health and wellness, are significant and will be. And one of the things that the governor has said is that we are not expected to have the peak until June. And hopefully that peak is not as high as originally thought. And I think that's, part of where the tribes have come in and taken this leadership to really protect our vulnerable communities will attribute to that lower than expected peak. But the economic costs are going to be significant. Our revenue numbers are down. And so the information that we've been given is more generalities. I know that the governor is putting the call out at the federal level to say, when we receive the COVID-19 recovery funds, that we would like to be able to put those resources towards some of our economic costs. And right now that is not the position, because nationwide they said that the states cannot use those funds to offset poor management. One of the things the governor has said is that South Dakota is very frugal in their tax collection. So we're heavily dependent on our revenues, and our revenues have been hit significantly. So that's the perspective. It's just knowing the overall economic health of South Dakota is going to be impacted. From that's from the executive side. From the legislature side, and definitely from the Democratic side, is saying we need to get these resources were intended to offset the impacts of COVID-19 and should be allocated there, and making sure that the districts that have tribes in there are also well represented in this recovery effort. But it's going to be, there's a lot of competing interests there. And as Democrats, as Native in legislature, we're definitely underrepresented. And so it's going to be a fight. We're advocating for it. We're pushing for it. The more that community members can be informed, involved, and get that information out and their recommendations in need, the more support we'll have in making our arguments. But then I'd like to tie this back to our election is coming up. A lot of these things would be different if people got out and voted. I know that there's been a lot of criticism on the way our governor has handled many situations. And I would say she won by 10,000 votes. Indian country alone could have made up that discrepancy. And I think that it would be in our best interest to really get out the vote.
I wanted to point out too that that both I didn't get a chance to ask the chairman about this, but both Cheyenne River and the Oglala Sioux Tribes are party to a lawsuit regarding the CARES Act funding. I was wondering if that had any role in this at all. Just putting that out there. So.
I don't believe so. I think that was at the federal level because it's still unclear of how the state is going to utilize those funds. But again, just making sure that our voices and our interests are being expressed and heard, and that we're advocating for it, because when you do get that money, we want to make sure that because we're going to be impacted heavily as the rest of the state, and just make sure that we do receive the type of resources that will help us overcome this situation.
And none of that funding has actually been dispersed yet, has it? The billions of dollars promised at the federal level to tribes.
I don't believe so.
I think I've heard that Oglala Sioux Tribe had it awarded, and then that Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe actually hasn't even gotten a notice of award at this point. But the chairman probably would know but I got that from one of their attorneys, so I think it was factual. And so they're sort of like, is this a sort of a retaliatory type of move in terms of, the federal government and how all of that, kind of comes down. I mean, I think about the urban health board and the urban health centers in Indian country. We heard out of Seattle that they had a series of body bags sent to them by FEMA or by a factory that was contracted and responded to a request for their medical supplies. And, it just seems so like macabre in terms of how, if the state of South Dakota is going to poorly mismanage this response to the pandemic in terms of acting like it doesn't exist, yet we have 27,000 people unemployed, and we have 70 people have died now. I'm sorry if I'm inflating that number, but I know that here in Rapid City, we just got 7 cases in one family, an extended family. They're Native. It's likely that this was contracted in the workplace. And then we have the White House itself as a workplace being infected with, the virus. And so are there what are going to be the real costs, and where are those resources going to go? I know that Red Dawn is a champion for us and for our people and for all the people, the people at Smithfield, all the people in Minnehaha who are suffering from a poor response to the pandemic. But I do want to just support and, say that we need to, have an effective voter engagement approach in the state, effective in a pandemic. Myself personally, I don't think that I can in good conscience, after knowing what happened in Wisconsin, where a number of people were infected with COVID at polling places, I think we need to register to vote and vote absentee for this. And I think that at least for, Governor Noem and her style and her brand that is emerging here in terms of confronting the tribes, I just don't think that's good for South Dakota overall. And I don't think that really is customary in South Dakota to approach it in an adversarial manner in that way. So anyway, I'd like to defer to the experts in public health, and I'd like to defer to the actual people who are incurring costs because of COVID, and if people lost their jobs, what are we going to do to help those families that aren't going to be able to put food on the table, that aren't going to be able to pay their rent, and that are suffering in this backlash? Because no matter what, I'm part of the gig economy, and all of it sort of froze up. Things got rescheduled, pushed back. There's no conferences to facilitate. There's, all those different things that, there's a hidden group of us in South Dakota as well, that deserve, to get a response. And if the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program is any indicator, we know that the wealthy corporate entities are the first to scoop up these resources that are being offered to relieve like the ordinary person from, what the cost of the pandemic, staying home, being sick, whatever it is, losing gigs. And I also think that it's a nonpartisan deal. Like I've seen Republicans just as critical of this now, and I'm so happy that the state legislators got together, the coalition they did, to counter Governor Noem's bullying that's going on. I think it's bullying because she knows that it's already a settled question.
Wasting